Welcome back to the channel, everyone. If you're not already subscribed, if you could please go ahead and do that now, I would really appreciate it. And also, if everyone could please sign up for the bell and give me a thumbs up, that would really be great. Now, last week I hit 20,000 subscribers, and I really wanted to thank you all for your support over the last few years since I started this channel. The reason I got started on YouTube is because I wanted to share with you my 20 years of experience as a full-time professional photographer, and maybe even more importantly, share with you the mistakes that I've made over the years. Now, I definitely don't know everything, but I just want to try to share with you what I do know in hopes that you'll be able to get better a lot faster and advance in your career a lot faster than it took me to do it, and also maybe to help you avoid some of those mistakes. So just know that no matter what, that is the position that I'm coming from. Now, I realize that you all probably don't know a lot about me, and that's because I don't like to talk about myself very much. I just sort of like to talk about photography. So in this video today, we're going to mix things up a little bit, and I'm going to talk about the course of my career and how I got to where I am today. So when I was 14, I took my mom's camera to summer camp, and I realized that it was a great tool for me to spark up conversations with people and sort of be my perfect extroverted self. Now, back home at school, I was fairly unpopular. I was a poor kid. I was very overweight, and the die was sort of cast for me, and I was sort of stuck. But when I went to camp and I had this camera, I realized that I was able to talk to anyone, and I was really having a great time with it. So I decided that I was going to save up and buy a camera and take photography classes when I got to high school. And so I don't know if it was that summer or the next one. I guess if I was 14, it probably was that summer. But I went ahead and worked for my friend's dad's landscaping company, and I wasn't a great worker by any stretch of the imagination. But I did save up enough money that summer to buy my very first camera, and that was a Vivitar film camera, and I had 2 kit lenses. And then I took a photography class in high school, and I just found that I really enjoyed it, and it was a calling for me. And so I kept doing it. And so I was working, started shooting things for the high school newspaper. I then became the editor of the high school newspaper. I became the photo editor of the yearbook. At the same time, I was doing assignments for the local weekly newspapers, shooting sports events, and sometimes even chasing ambulances. But things really changed for me when I hit 18, because my father died when I was 8 years old, and my 7 years old. I always think it's 8. And my stepmother sued the government. It turns out, I believe, that he died from medical malpractice at the Veterans Administration Hospital. And she sued them and got a settlement. And when I turned 18 years of age, I got basically $16,667.67. So I have a special affinity for lawyers because if it wasn't for them, my life probably would have turned out differently. I probably would have been a blue-collar worker like most of my family. I was the first person in my immediate and near family to ever go to college. I think my youngest cousin is the second, but I didn't even meet him until 10 years ago when he found me on Facebook. But just know that when I turned 18 and I got that settlement money, I was able to buy my first real cameras and lenses. And that was a huge boost to my career. And also, I was able to pay for myself going to college. But before that happened, there was a historical flood in the Portland area in Oregon. That's where I'm from. And I photographed 2 guys in a canoe shaking a cat out of a tree. And my high school photography teacher was a freelancer for AP, and so he suggested that I go and talk to them and see if they were interested in the pictures. And so I went there, they developed the film, and they ended up picking up and paying for those pictures that day. And ever since then, the 2 senior photographers there became my mentors, and I was freelancing for them through college. the college that I was able to pay for with the money from the settlement. After college was over, well, also during that time, I was also freelancing for like the New York Times and USA Today and People magazine and whatever sort of came along. And so at the end of college, I applied to 70 different newspapers, and I ended up picking the largest one that offered me a job, and that was in Topeka, Kansas. And so I moved, halfway across the country to Topeka, and it couldn't have been more opposite than Portland, both in terrain and in culture. And I didn't get paid a lot. In fact, even going to Steak and Shake with my colleagues was a bit of a stretch because I barely had enough money to eat at home. But after about a year, I decided that I would quit and I would go back to freelancing in Portland. And I did so hoping that I could go back to freelancing for AP again. There was a new newspaper that was starting up that came out twice a week in Portland. I thought I could get assignments for them. And as it turned out, this sort of risk that I took paid off because 3 years later, 85% of what I did was work for AP, and I had stuff from that newspaper as well. And I had some commercial clients and that sort of thing. And the oldest photographer at AP decided he was going to retire. And so I interviewed for that job a couple of times. And everyone thought that I was going to get that job. And then one day I found out that they were going to transfer a photographer there from Washington, D.C., and that 85% of my business just disappeared. And so I had to figure out something to do, and so I talked to all of the photographers that I knew, including a retired photographer that used to work for UPI, and he said, well, I know someone at Reuters, and Reuters is like, I believe it's the world's largest news gathering international organization. And so his friend was the guy in charge of Reuters photography for North America, and so I talked to him, and he said, well, we always need photographers in New York and in DC, but we really need a photographer right now in Chicago. And if you were to go there, I could offer you 15 days a month, and you'd sort of be like the Midwest regional photographer, and you'd go to all sorts of other cities. And so with just a conversation on a phone, not even a handshake agreement or a real contract, I said yes. The only hitch was he wanted me to stay in Portland for about 2 months in order to photograph the Women's World Cup. And so I did that. And I wasn't really working much during that time, so I was racking up debt. Then I moved to Chicago, more debt. I got there in October of 2003, and I didn't realize that October was the slow season in Chicago, as well as October, November, and December. And so I sat there looking out at a brand new, beautiful city, unable to do anything in it because I was sliding backwards. And it was really a scary time for me. And it's sort of, well, the entire
I didn't get that. Could you try again?
I will.
Sorry, I'm still not sure about that.
It was a hard time for me to be sliding backwards because when I was a kid, things were really difficult. Like we would pay the rent, and the last 10 days, once a month before payday, we wouldn't have any food at home, and we'd have to go eat at my grandmother's house, and we were on food stamps and sometimes lived in public housing. And so a lot of my choices in my life have been out of fear that I will end up in poverty again. And so I guess poverty has been a great motivator because I've always sort of worked hard to persevere through things. And so I got through that winter in Chicago where I hadn't been working much for the previous 5 months, and maybe I had $10,000 in debt.
I'm sorry.
Thank you. And it was really stressful. And but the NFL playoffs started in January. How do you feel about that? And I started getting all kinds of work, and I started traveling around to different cities and shooting football games. And all of a sudden, that promise that I would be the Midwest regional photographer came to pass. And over the next few years, I had a lot of fun covering everything from tornadoes to the Super Bowl to the PGA Championship. I mean, the tornadoes aren't fun, but that was things I would do. to the Stanley Cup, to the NBA All-Star Game. I always wanted to be a sports photographer when I was a kid, and now all of a sudden I was doing it, but at a very high level. And it was great. I started shooting politics because of where Chicago is located in the rest of the country. I was shooting national political campaigns for president. And so at one point, I was standing next to Barack Obama, like cursing out a male reporter for being a misogynist as the press conference was starting, and someone was pulling on my arm to shut up. I was there the day that John McCain selected Sarah Palin to be his running mate. I got an unsolicited shoulder rub and whisper in my ear from Joe Biden at some point. And overall, it was a lot of fun, but the whole time hanging over me was the fear that I get the rug pulled out from under me again, because I wasn't an employee. I was just there on not even a handshake. And at the same time, Reuters was hiring other full-time freelancers in other cities. There were about 12 of us maybe in that position. And so I thought they might hire me, but I also was fearful they might hire someone else. And so I secretly applied for some other jobs, like big city newspapers, and thankfully none of them hired me because it would have derailed the course of my life. But everything really changed for me in 2008 to 2010. Going into the Great Recession in 2008, Reuters was about 2/3 of my income. I then had a lot of other work coming in from trade magazines where I would shoot portraits of business people. I loved doing that. They were all environmental portraits. It was great. I also would work for like People Magazine and USA Today and the New York Times and that sort of thing. And then I also had some commercial clients, and they were mostly portraits of business people and other executives. And it was really a good experience, but the recession happened. And around that time, also, Reuters decided to transfer a photographer from DC to Chicago. It's always a photographer from DC, apparently. So my work for Reuters went from maybe 22 assignments a month to 15 to 12 to 6 to nothing. And all of those contacts I had at those newspapers and big magazines, they were older photographers. And so they got bought out so the company could save money. And then all of a sudden, I didn't get jobs from those places because the people I knew didn't work there anymore. And then all of those trade magazines that I had, they just went out of business. And so all of that work disappeared. And it was an extremely scary time to be standing on the edge of this cliff, not knowing what would happen and wondering if things would end up like the grapes of wrath. And I didn't even realize it, but I was planting the seeds for my future right before the recession hit, and I didn't even know it. So a friend of mine came to me and he said, "I want to be a fashion photographer. Would you teach me lighting?" And so I said, sure. You know, up to that point, I had only photographed business people. I'd never worked with a model in my life. So the first night we went out there and I was the model and he was the photographer. And that went pretty well. I wasn't great at it. We thankfully ended up finding some people that actually wanted to be models, and we started working with them. And I realized that it was fantastic because they didn't want me to perform a 5-minute drive-by shooting. They would actually sit there and let me try out new things and perfect my lighting and make great pictures, at least what I thought were great pictures, not just good pictures. But he came to me one day and he said, "You know, I don't really need you to teach me anymore. I don't really need to know all this technical stuff. That's stuff that you need to know for Reuters. I just want to feel the pictures, and I'm going to go to Paris to find myself." This was pretty much what he said. I'm not making any of that up. That was all in the course of one conversation. So that was the end of our relationship, but I realized that I sort of found myself. And so I started shooting these models, and I thought my skills were really good that night that he came to me and asked me to teach him, but really they were down here. And over the course of the next few years, my skills got to be a lot better. Maybe they were around here. And so around, one of these times that I was doing these model test shoots, because I kept doing them after he went to Paris, I was on a shoot where there were about 6 models and a couple of fashion stylists and hair and makeup crew and everything. And it turns out we needed another hairstylist. Everyone was just working together, collaborating for fun for their portfolios. So one of the fashion stylists found this hairstylist, and he came to the shoot, and turned out that he and I became really good friends. And it's such a privilege that I can actually like pull up a picture and look at the metadata and know that this is the day that we met. And so he and I, it turns out that he was basically the art director for a company that makes curriculum for beauty schools. And so he ended up becoming my best client. And that was at the beginning of the turnaround from the recession. Some of that journalism work came back. Some of my commercial work came back. And even though 2009 was a very slim year, 2010 was very much a turnaround year. And that was the first year that journalism went to only 50% of my income, and commercial photography made it up to 50% of my income. And ever since then, it switched. And now commercial is most of what I do, and journalism is basically nothing. But because I had worked at those models and I practiced to improve my skills from here to here, I was ready when that opportunity came along to work for my friend's company. And then because I had worked for that company and I had that on my resume and I had a portfolio to match, every time that I met someone in the beauty industry looking for a photographer, I ended up with their business because I had that seal of approval and I had the work to prove that I could do the work. And so over, the next few years, I started to not practice so much. And I started to focus on video because it was becoming a new thing for photographers. It never really became a huge thing for me. Most of what I do now in video isn't for clients, it's this. And about 2015, a friend talked me into getting back or to joining on Instagram, setting up an account, however you want to word it. And so I got on Instagram, and guess what? I ran out of my old content and I had to create new content, so that means that I had to practice again. And so I think if you scroll back in my feed to 2015, you'll see that, yeah, my lighting skills were here. But as I kept practicing, they got way better. And at the same time, all of my clients got to be better too. Now, I am not the best. I want to get better. And so I keep practicing every week in order to push myself and to strive to get better. It might not be every week, but at least it's a few times a month that I'm trying out a new idea or trying to perfect an old idea and just pushing the envelope. And so that's a lot of the content that you see on this channel and on Instagram. It's not my client work. And so just thinking back over my career, remember I wanted to be a sports photographer. I wanted to be a political photographer. I did those things. Then because my friend came along that one night and asked me to teach him, I kind of didn't realize that I wanted to be a model photographer, but I guess that's what I wanted to do. And because I pursued that endeavor, I had no idea when I started that I was going to end up being a commercial beauty photographer, if that's what you want to call it. So just know that whatever it is that you're interested in doing, the best thing you can do is practice. If you want to improve your lighting skills, it doesn't matter right now if you have one light or 15 lights or no lights. Just go out there and get started, even if it's with a reflector or bounce flash or a small softbox. The experience you have will lead to the work, and you'll be ready when opportunities come along. And if you are going through a hard time right now, I know it's a very hard time for creatives, you will get through this, and you will emerge better than when the pandemic started. Just like I came out of the recession, I started off scared to death and then ended up being in a much better position afterwards. You will get there. You will get through any endeavor that you come to. Just know that practice is what's going to separate you from all the other aspiring photographers. So stay safe, have a great day, never give up, call your mom, and I'll talk to you soon.